Hallo und herzlich willkommen bei Wir müssen reden, der Podcast für Scrum Master, Agile Coaches und diejenigen, die es werden wollen. Hier geht es um die Themen Organisationsentwicklung, Arbeiten in agilen Teams, der Umgang mit Komplexität und Leadership. Es geht um deine Fragen aus deinem konkreten Alltag und wir geben dir Denkanstöße. Schön, dass du wieder eingeschaltet hast und los geht's. Welcome everybody to this new episode, and we have a special guest today. That's why we also talk in English, and I have Jurgen Appelo with me. He calls himself a creative networker, but sometimes he's just a writer, speaker, trainer, entrepreneur, illustrator, manager, blogger, reader, dreamer, leader, or freethinker, or just the Dutch guy. Inc.com has called him a top 15 leadership expert and a top 100 leadership speaker. From 2008, Jurgen wrote a popular blog on noob.nl, offering ideas on the creative economy, agile management, organizational change, and personal development. He's the author of the book Management 3.0, which describes the role of the manager in agile organizations, How to Change the World, which describes a supermodel for change management, Managing for Happiness, which offers you practical ideas to engage workers, improve work, and delight clients, and Startup, Scale Up, Screw Up, which dives into the major topics that business leaders and entrepreneurs are confronted with throughout the business lifecycle. Welcome to the show, Jurgen Appelo.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be here.
Do you have anything to add, anything the listeners need to know about you?
Oh, well, you gave quite a bit of an introduction already. But I don't know. I am trying to write a novel that is not yet on this list.
Yeah.
My next book project is actually a sci-fi novel, completely different topic, but some people find that interesting to know. Yeah, I think you mentioned the rest already.
Okay, cool. So just recently on LinkedIn, I saw a very interesting post because you said something in the lines of, "Oh, thank God we finally moved on from Agile versus Lean and Scrum versus Kanban debates." So I would like to know, what are more useful debates in your opinion? What should the Agile community discuss more about in your opinion?
Well, yeah, I made that comment sort of tongue-in-cheek, but of course there's always a serious note behind it. Yeah. When I observed people talking about X versus Y, and it seems that the debates in the Agile community are always about that, one thing versus another thing, and whether it is Agile versus Lean or Scrum versus Kanban or safe versus less or UnFix versus team topologies. And my God, I do understand that people like having such polarizing discussions, but at the same time, I don't think it really brings us any further when we're just shooting arrows at each other, at other people who are trying to do a decent job in their particular part of the community. And as I've always said, with the frameworks, for example, let's take SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework. For me, the glass is half full, not half empty. I know quite a few people in that community, and I know they're good people. They're trying to do a great job. And there are some aspects of the framework that I don't like, but ultimately it's just a collection of good practices that work for some companies in some parts of the world. So if we see it for that, then fine. So I would like to sometimes move on the A versus B discussions and go to a bit more of a systemic discussion, like how can we scale organizations horizontally rather than vertically, because that seems to be a problem when we have enterprises with 12 layers of management in the middle. Where things move very slowly, that have a very difficult time to adapting to fast moving companies such as Tesla or Hire or whatever, that have far fewer layers of management. So I think those are more interesting discussions than should you do that with framework A or method B.
Yeah. Yeah. But do you really think that management is the problem, or what exactly is then the problem with management layers?
Well, they tend to slow things down. I am not against abstraction, by the way. Abstraction is a very common phenomenon in systems. I mean, there is a reason we use teams and refer to teams, because for the rest of the organization, that is an abstraction. When we can talk about Team X rather than having to name the individual people one by one.
Yes, yeah.
That is very inconvenient. So we call them a team, and that is in itself an abstraction. You just created a layer, a mini system inside a larger system. That is completely normal. We cannot communicate otherwise, basically, and that is how communication is optimized. But when you have 12 of these layers, 12 of these abstractions, and information has to move from one to the other through 12 points, hopping back and forth or up and down, then you have an issue. And I've discussed that with my first book, Management 3.0, and this is still a hot topic decades, in 15 years after I published the book, basically, or 13 years actually. But the discussion has been going on for decades already, and it seems we still can't solve it. How to make organizations flatter with fewer layers of management. I'm not saying zero, because that's never going to work, but we need fewer abstraction levels, so that information flow can happen faster. And I'm very much inspired by how networks work, whether it's the human brain or ecosystems or whatnot. Complexity science offers us a lot of inspiration on how to have things scale horizontally rather than vertically, as I always say.
Yeah, especially the complexity science aspect is really interesting, I think. And if you see how they analyze scaling, then it's by decomposing, right? Not by aggregating. So you decompose the system in its coherent parts, and then you try to make new links between these. It's like, I don't know, music. We have only 12 tones, right? And you can make zillions of songs with just 12 notes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, indeed. That's a very nice analogy. And I posted just an hour ago an article on the blog, on the UnFix blog, about turf types, which in the UnFix model is an example of horizontal scaling. When a unit gets too large, you can introduce groups that without managers, but just to create containers for people to have a sense of belonging or have a sense of territory. And I gave, as an example, the houses in Harry Potter's Hogwarts University. I'm sure you're familiar with Harry Potter, and J.K. Rowling at the time invented the concept of the house, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw and Slytherin. And I looked it up, and it turns out that there are roughly around 600 kids at Hogwarts University. So by having 4 houses, she divided the 600 kids into groups of 150. Now, I don't know if she did that intentionally, but that is exactly Dunbar's number. 150. I mean, is that a coincidence or not? Because up to roughly 150, the research suggests that we can feel a sense of belonging in a group of that size. Then we know people by their first name. Yeah. So a kid within the house of Hufflepuff knows the other 149 kids by their first name, possibly. But not all 600 people at Hogwarts University. That's too much. So that's a way of scaling. You create smaller containers, but there is no people manager on a house. So of course, there are some, maybe a captain or some informal roles, moderators or whatever, that could even be on a rotating basis. For example, like the elderly kids have a few more rights than the younger kids. So all of that very democratic. So no managers are involved.
Yeah, yeah. But then on top, you create more complexity on the coordination side, right? Because then you have 4 houses, but you of course need someone who coordinates between these 4 houses, because you have still 600 people to manage somehow.
True. And this is an example of where we can be inspired by network science, because in network topologies, we also work with strong ties versus weak ties. There's clusters of neurons in the human brain, for example, with lots of connections between them, and then long distance connections between neurons far away in the brain, far fewer connections, and those are the weak ties in the network. And you need both. You need the strong ties for the small groups, the closely knit groups, and you need the long distance connections to far away places in the network. And the hub and spoke model, they call that in air traffic lingo. For airplanes, and it's a well-known principle, and that is how networks scale without introducing vertical layers of management where everyone has departments, and then the departments become business units and divisions and so on.
How was it called? Sorry, again. A protocol, or what was it?
I'm sorry, I don't remember. Don't know which word you were referring to.
Okay, because you said that that's how airplanes and stuff scale.
Oh, the hub and spoke model. In airlines often use a hub and spoke model. So we have hubs where the airplanes return to, so that at the hub you have shorter connections to the places that are very close, and long distance connections far
I see.
away.
Okay.
And you see the same mathematical principles basically showing up in very different kinds of networks in the world. And that so that they have not divided the world's airspace network into silos with units and divisions and 12 layers of management.
Yeah.
There's country level management, and that's basically it.
Yeah. Okay. So then when we are right there, let's dive more into the UnFix model. So what problem did you see, and for what or why is UnFix a solution to that? What did you try to solve with it?
Well, basically what we just discussed, how to scale organizations horizontally rather than vertically, because scaling is apparently a hot topic in the Agile community still, which is why the scaled Agile framework has become so popular. Because at the time in 2001, when the Agile Manifesto was created, they did not try to solve all the problems in the known universe, as Ron Jeffrey said at the time. And for good reasons. They focused on large projects that could be handled by one team. That was it. And they tried to optimize how that would work. If you had one team that was dealing with one project, they had very good suggestions for that. But they didn't think of enterprises, how that would work. But an enterprise is not 10,000 Scrum teams of 7 people. You need more to have it all connect together. How do these teams talk with each other? What does the network look like? So I wanted to give some suggestions there that would be an alternative to framework thinking, because for all its good intentions, as I said earlier, the glass is half full, not half empty, as far as I'm concerned. But for all its good intentions, SAFe does collect a lot of nice practices from all over the world, but they present it as a framework. And I don't like the concept of the framework, because the frame is something that is rigid. You must implement the frame, otherwise you have nothing. And the framework in SAFe is essential SAFe with the ARCH, the Agile Release Train. You must have an Agile Release Train, otherwise you do not have SAFe, basically. And I wanted to offer something that is more loose, more optional, less mandatory. And that's why I started the UnFix model. It's a pattern library rather than a framework. I'm not the first one. There are others. I credit team topologies. Sociocracy is a pattern library. Liberating structures is a pattern library. Even Management 3.0, I've always called that a toolbox, never a framework, because nothing is mandatory in Management 3.0. So it's in the simpler space, you could say.
But don't you think, though, at least I got the feeling that especially large enterprises, they like to have something to fall back to, right? To hold on. So they like this rigidity, so that they have a framework, and there's somebody like self-consultant, they tell them, okay, you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you are there.
Yeah.
So it's something which is nice to have, so to say.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, that's a very good point indeed. So something that we can learn from that they do well, apparently, is selling it to enterprises. And it is worth thinking about the why. What is it that these frameworks do that allows them to sell? And I think an important part is offering a sense of certainty, a sense of predictability of what is it that I'm going to get. It's like you offer a manual, and from page 1 to page 10 or 20, it says, this is what you're going to get at the end. This is the outcome that we promise you. We can even draw a picture of it. And that feels very certain to the people buying this. I do not believe this is something that you can really promise that way, because the reality doesn't look like that. Once you end with a safe implementation, things are going to be very, very different. If you would implement it according to the context that the organization has, you need very specific solutions. So I think a more honest approach would be to say, well, we don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be, but what is certain is the process. And I think that's where we are going with the UnFix model. We cannot promise a certain outcome, because the outcome depends on the organization and their context. But what we can promise is the process, the certainty of what are the steps that we're going through. And you can compare that, for example, with political elections. Everyone knows how political elections are going to work. We will have elections again in my country in November. We know the process. Everyone knows. So everyone knows the game. Nobody knows the exact outcome. That's rather unpredictable. Of course, some people try to predict. That's the fun part. But there is a sense of certainty and safety for everyone, because we know what the process is. We know the process is well managed, and that gives us a sense of certainty and safety for moving that direction. It's the same with World Championship football or the Olympic Games or whatever. You don't know who's going to win, but the process is very predictable. So I think the mistake made by frameworks is that they promise an outcome. And what they should promise, or what we should do, is promise predictability in the process. These are the steps that we're going through. We will go through together. And we're going to explore. A significant part will be exploration and playing and so on, and see what emerges. But then we're going to have something that will fit you. That is the promise of the process. You will get what you deserve. Like elections.
Yes, yeah,
People
exactly.
get the government they deserve.
Oh man.
So I think the analogy is pretty spot on. And you can also compare a bit closer to home a design sprint. For example, some people are very familiar with design sprints in design thinking. That is a very predictable process. So what we're going to do on day 1, day 2, day 3, and 4 and 5. We don't know what the ideas are going to be at the end of the design sprint, but you can draw exactly the process. So yeah, I think me and my team will have to do a lot more effort there in what is the process going to look like for playing with the UnFix model. That I don't know exactly what people are going to get as organization design, but we promise them it will be what they deserve. That's because they play the game.
Can you give more insight on how this process looks like?
Well, I think it's going to involve quite a bit of playing and experimenting, and just familiarizing people with the options that they have. Would they like to have reteaming in the organization or not, for example? Some companies benefit a lot from dynamic reteaming, and other companies really don't like this. We should respect that. But that is a choice. And then with the choice they make, you can either go left or you go right. These are fundamental choices to make. And as I said, that's where I will have to do work with my team to see what are fundamental choices, what are the steps in the process. Right now, I don't know yet. What I have is the basic UnFix model with lots of patterns, lots of choices, lots of possibilities, like a big Lego box. I always use that metaphor of Lego that offers you lots of possibilities to make things. And the next step is to show what are the possible things you can make with the Lego blocks as inspiration, without telling people this is the result that you're going to get, because what you will get depends on how well you play with the Lego blocks. And that's I think that's exciting, actually. But it's we will have to sell this in another way, I'm pretty sure, than the frameworks do.
If some of the listeners have never heard from the UnFix patterns, can you give some examples of what patterns are in the Lego box?
Sure. So we have categorized them into, I believe, 32 different sets. One set is the crew types or the team types, in part inspired by team topologies, but I also have some other sources where we have the value stream crew, your typical Scrum team, Agile team, Kanban team, whatever your flavor is, doesn't matter. They cover the value stream. Another type is the platform crew that offers internal services to the other value stream crews. The governance crew is the management team, basically, and so on. So those are 7 crew types of the crew types set, but we have 31 other sets. One is a set for decision making, for example. How do teams make decisions? Because dot voting is one, consensus is one, unanimity is one, scoring with a spreadsheet in various columns is one, etc. Those are several examples, but there are 15 in total that this set offers. As the principle behind it, I just wanted to offer the options, then show people this is possible. These are the building blocks, where frameworks and methods often have a preference for a specific decision-making method. Take, for example, holacracy and sociocracy. They are described as, holacracy in particular is a framework. It has a constitution that tells you exactly what you need to do with the meetings that you have in your circles, the holacracy circles, as they call them. And for them, consent-based decision-making is the preferred decision-making method. And that means people can do anything they want unless someone has a valid objection, unless there is a veto, so to say. And I agree, that's a very good decision-making method. Makes you very fast. It reduces the number of bottlenecks, because if someone says a veto or I object, that person has to offer a very compelling reason for an objection. And then the rest of the team will have to respond to that. But I can offer plenty of examples where consent-based decision-making is not the best way to make a decision. For example, if you have a team agreement or a constitution yourself, I would prefer unanimity. Marriage is an example where we would like unanimity of the two partners, right?
Yes, that's right.
And you don't say, well, either of the two can do what they want unless there is a veto. That sounds really weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one other set, decision-making methods. And then we have forum types, we have teaming options. It's another set. What are the different ways teams can do reteaming in their organization? We offer quite some examples in UnFix courseware and on the blog of companies such as Pipedrive and Tesla and Fluid Scrum teams, etc. Redgate software that successfully apply reteaming, people joining other teams at a regular cadence, so moving around. And some do that maybe once per year. Tesla does that every 3 hours. Tesla is a bit insane in that sense, to be honest. But Tesla is a very special case.
Yes, yeah.
But they show that it is possible to do reteaming in a predictable cadence every 3 hours. People form different combinations of 2, 3, 4 people in a larger pool of 100 or 150 factory workers. That works for them. So who am I to say that they do it wrong? The numbers show that Tesla does a pretty good job.
How do you know that Tesla works with reteaming in a 3-hour cadence? Did you work with them?
No, not me, but Joe Justice does. I know him, met him several times, and he has worked at Tesla for a year and a half. So he describes in his keynotes how that works, that you, every 3 hours, you sign up yourself for another task. So that is swarming. People decide themselves what they want to work on. They are not assigned by anyone. So it's not top-down decisions. It is people volunteering for work that they would like to be involved in. But every 3 hours, they can switch. And that the reason is that after a couple of months, people know everything in the whole factory. They have worked on AI, they have worked on machines, they have worked on art and on paint. So it takes a while, of course, to build up that knowledge. But then people are very interchangeable across the whole organization, and you don't get silo thinking. They optimize the whole factory. They don't optimize teams that way. And well, good for them. I would not like to work at such a cadence, to be honest. But having to switch every 3 hours with a different team. But some people like it, and so they have optimized for the kinds of people who like working there with that setup. But as I said, this is an extreme example.
At least you know what you're going to get, right? So when you apply at Tesla,
you know what you get when you apply it. But there are other companies that have a bit more modest form of reteaming, where reteaming happens every few weeks or every few months, for example. That's pretty doable.
So basically, UnFix is a pattern library. That's what you said. So why patterns? Why is patterns so? Yeah, why just patterns?
Well, in the 70s, I believe, of last century, Professor Christopher Alexander wrote a book called A Pattern Language, and that had 253 patterns on urban planning and city design. So he just looked at how cities work, what makes them livable, what makes something a nice city. And then he came up with well-known patterns as the town square and the promenade and etc. The children's way, an easy way for children to get across the city without having to cross busy streets. So it makes it safe for them. 253 patterns that he found. He simply collected them. He published them as a book, and it became a big success, worldwide phenomenon, because nobody had done that before. So that was an inspiration for people who try to make cities more livable, to see what can we do to make this a better place. And that is the idea of a pattern library. You're not trying to invent something, you're just collecting things that already work, that seem to work well in certain places, and then you give those a name, a pattern name, and a number perhaps in a collection, and then you tell people, these are the options that we found. There are probably more, by the way, but this is a good starting set. And then you pick what you want in your context. So it requires a bit of intelligence for the people picking and choosing. And this was in the 70s. In the 90s, we had in IT world a very famous book called The Design Patterns by the Gang of Four.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know it as well, David. So with 23 patterns, the model view controller, the singleton, the facade pattern, and so on. These were familiar patterns that they named, that made it easier to use them in your own IT architecture. I'm just trying to do the same with ways of working. How do people work together across enterprises? And then you pick and choose. But I'm not telling anyone, this is the framework, this is what you must have, and then you fill the empty slots in the framework. No, that is not what a pattern library is.
My point is just that, don't you think that people or the towns, when we stay with that example, make the patterns work and not the other way around? So that there are cities that have a town square and whatever, children's walkthrough place and whatnot, but they're still shitty. And it's the same with organizations. You know, I know a lot of organizations, and they have, when you look, they have a lot of these patterns, but it's still not working for them. So my question is, I think that the patterns are useful, but there are still some magic ingredients, or what is the magic glue that makes the patterns work?
Yeah, culture, yes.
Culture, yeah.
So I'm not trying to solve the culture problem. There are thousands of books already written on that topic. So why bother addressing that again? I am making an assumption that you have an organization with people who are willing to create a better organization, a better company, where some fundamental aspects of organizational culture are already in place. And yes, then this pattern library is going to be useful for them. But in the same way, sociocracy is going to be useless, and team topology is going to be useless, and all the other pattern libraries, the same, they will be useless if there is no culture of people who want to learn and make things better for in their organization. Then UnFixes are not going to help either. And I also get the question every now and then, but how do I convince our managers that this is something to start using? And I tell people there are already 10,000 books on change management and persuasion and so on. I'm not going to start again describing what has already been described many times by other people. So if you struggle with implementing or introducing ideas in the organization, don't ask me. Well, I wrote a book, How to Change the World, just a little book, 90 pages, long time ago. That was my contribution to this topic of change management. I don't want to cover that again. There's so much good stuff on how to introduce ideas in organizations. If you want to learn that, go elsewhere. But if you want to know what the patterns are, check out the UnFix model.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah. But just from the literature that I know is that the entire culture discussion is very based on a machinistic thinking, you know, so that they think that they can just create the culture they want, and that's not that easy, you know. As over the last years, when I learned a lot about systemic theory and system thinking and stuff like that, then you know that the culture is more or less just happening to you, and you get the culture you deserve. Then we are back again at that thing. Yeah. But it's fine, right? So
it's understand. Well, you could say it's a bit similar to workout programs, or Pilates or yoga or whatever. How do you convince someone to start yoga? Well, that's not within yoga to explain.
You're right.
Yoga is yoga. If you like yoga, then check it out. If you don't like yoga, well,
don't do it.
Yoga is not going to tell you how to do yoga when you don't like it.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so when you talked about that you have patterns for teaming, and things I almost always see in organizations is the discussion, how do teams or crews form around projects, around topics, around what do they form? Do they stay constant? Do they change? We already discussed about that, re-teaming and stuff. But it's always the discussion, what if the people just sit around and they have nothing to do? So is there any solution to that? So how can you make sure that the crews form around the right things?
Good question. I think a fundamental question is that everyone needs to know who their customer is. If you cannot answer the question, who is your customer, then you should scratch your head and wonder, why are you working there at that organization? So either the customer is someone outside the organization that is paying you your salary. That's what you're paid from what that customer pays as invoices or fees or whatever. Or it can be an internal customer, another unit, another team that you are serving, like team coaches serve the agile teams or the value stream crews that they work with. So then those are their customers. Or a platform crew knows that they offer an internal service to an organization, whether it is IT infrastructure or even kindergarten, as one of my favorite examples of a company a number of years ago, where there's a small company with kindergarten in the basement, and that's a platform service. That's a service that small unit offers to the rest of the company. So they know who their customers are. You should be able to ask any person in the company, who are you working for? If they don't know, then you have a problem with your organization design. Then you apparently haven't created the circles or the teams or the squads or whatever you would like to call them. We call them crews, in a way that makes sense to people, because they don't know whom they're working for.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, but I think that exactly is the problem in most of the large organizations or enterprises. That's just so much internal stuff going on that they forgot who or what their customer is. Yeah, and then it's of course very difficult to make a good job.
And indeed, and my favorite example, I keep bringing them up, is the Chinese company Haier, where I was 12 years ago. At the time, they had transformed from a traditional organization with 10 layers of management or something into a network. They fired the complete middle management, or actually they offered them the opportunity to become CEOs of micro enterprises, as they called them. So now Haier is 4,000 mini companies of 10, 20 people. Some are bigger, some are just a handful, like startups. Yeah. And they work together in networks, or in one large network. And every unit within that large company, and they're now nearly 100,000 people, they know who their customers are. So they already told me back then, 12 years ago, that they had multiple HR units that were offering their services internally to the rest of the company, knowing that they had to get paid somehow, offering people support services. And if the rest of the network didn't like them, then they would cease to exist. And they even competed with each other, those multiple HR units, for the privilege of being allowed to offer their services and getting paid for that. And by the way, they could also offer their services externally outside of hire. They were allowed. And at the same time, the rest of the network was allowed to procure HR services outside of the company rather than internally. And then you have a free market.
Yes. Yeah. You create a free market in your own company. Yeah.
And to be honest, China was the last place on the planet where I expected to find a company with an internal market-driven organization design, where everyone was told, you need to know who your customer is and make sure they are willing to pay you. Otherwise, you have no reason to exist in this organization. And they drove that to the extreme by literally creating 4,000, or at that time 3,000 little units that had to collaborate and compete in a large network for the privilege of offering services to each other or to the outside. And you don't need to go to that extreme again, because Tesla and Hire are extremes, but for me, they plant a flag at the horizon. So you could go in that direction. But take it easy, take small steps. You don't have to be them tomorrow, but you can be inspired by how they got their reorganizations done, what they are doing in terms of radical innovation, and then figure out what you can do yourself. But it shows that people need to know who their customers are.
Okay, so last question in this topic area, and then we move on to the AI things.
Okay, sure.
Why do you think, why are transformations so painful for a lot of organizations? What do you think?
because people don't like change, me included. So because it's very human. We like the things the way things are, and change requires effort, and we definitely don't like being changed by other people. And when I say we don't like change, that's not entirely true, because I do like change when there's something in it for me, when I see the benefit. And I think that is the main problem with most organizations, that those who are trying to make a transformation happen, they're not able to explain well enough what the benefit is for each person in the organization. And in general, people see more risks than benefits. That's a human thing.
Yeah.
We're very risk averse, and we mostly see problems and only few opportunities. And yeah, that is a thing that coaches and consultants and managers just have to work with, that people on average see more risk than opportunities. They put higher weight on the risk part of a change. But then once you've solved that, and there's, as I said, there are tons of books on that on that topic. Yeah. Not my personal expertise. It comes back to the question. Then you need to explain what are ultimately the benefits for each individual person, and that is different for different people. So the benefits for the executives are different from the benefits for the average team worker. So there should be different benefits for different people. And that is, I think, where many transformations fail, because they are probably purchased by a management layer for, I don't know, perhaps keeping up with the rest of the industry by being more agile, but they don't know how to explain this or sell this to the others in the enterprise.
Do you think that transformations are the right way to go in the first place? So instead of just doing analyzing what is the problem and just doing small changes, instead of just calling it the big transformation and the next 5 years everything will change, it's, for me, it's two different approaches.
Good question. I ended my first book, Management 3.0, with a chapter on Kaizen versus Kaikaku, or continuous change versus radical change. What you refer to as Kaizen, indeed, most of the time we need Kaizen, small changes, step by step. I agree with that, but system science shows that if you do step-by-step improvement, at some point you may get stuck at a local optimum. And the only way to get out of the local optimum solution and jump to another point in what they call the fitness landscape is with a radical transformation. And that is kaikaku rather than kaizen. But it's good to do kaizen first because you need to create awareness of what the landscape looks like. So it is good to have some expertise in small changes in the organization and be aware of what could potentially be a radical change. For example, by using the UnFix model in one small isolated part of the organization, one business unit, do some exploration there with the patterns and so on. And once you know that things are working, and I'm sure they did that at Hire as well, because they did a radical change in around 2010, but they did some local experimentation first before they thought, okay, now we have to roll this out in the whole company. The Kaizen approach is not going to do that for us. So first, small experimentation. Then once you get, then at some point you will notice that. I'm sure you get to a point where small changes aren't going to cut it anymore. Now we need something big. And that's you need both.
Okay. Then next topic, AI. It's one of the biggest things over the last 5 years that popped up and will continue to change our lives in the next 10 years, 20 years.
Apparently,
apparently. So what do you think is the role of AI in organizational design?
I don't think there is one role. I think there are a number of consequences of the emergence of AI in organizations, and we need to see the opportunities and apply them well. I think at some point, we're not there yet, but at some point in the future, we should be able to ask AIs for suggestions for our ways of working. For example, we could say at some point, we have these kinds of people, this challenge that they are confronted with. What do you suggest as our ways of working? How should we organize ourselves in teams? What kind of meetings or collaboration moments, and so on? And then perhaps it could generate a framework per case. I think that would be ideal once an AI understands the topic, the case, the context, then from available literature and knowledge on human ways of working, it could suggest, well, in this case, I would perhaps a Scrum adaptation. Here, I would suggest some team topologies, a structure, or whatever. We're not there yet by far, but that is one opportunity I see behind the horizon. In the short term, I just see consequences for individual people that will matter to them. So, for example, I'm writing a new book, as I said at the very beginning, and yes, I am using AI to offer suggestions for better language, better prose, just to keep up with all the other writers around me.
Yeah.
Because as some people say, and I agree with that, you will not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to another person who knows how to use AI.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you don't know it, then you're out. So that is the change that we're going through, that all of us have to learn just to keep up with everyone else around us, because they're going to go faster because of the things that AIs can do for us. It is making my work, some of my work easier for as a writer, and I'm sure it's the same for programmers and coaches and managers and so on, HR, recruiters, you name it.
Yeah. So for me, it sounds like that you are not that concerned as a lot of other people are, because when I read some blogs or see interviews, then it's like we are doomed, and the AIs will reign over us at some day.
Rule the world. No,
they
no,
rule the world, and I don't know. I cannot relate to that, because for me, AI is still some statistical and causal model, and for me, it will never be possible for them to do real creative work. It's just exactly as you said. It's just how can you use it to make your own life easier. But
it's exactly like that. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm trying to keep up a little bit. So I read, and the books that I tend to agree with explain that our current generation of AI, generative AI, is going to be stuck in a corner, because it's incredibly good at some things, pattern matching and generation of things that look real, but at the same time it's incredibly stupid. It has no idea what it is doing. So it can give you a million pictures of a cat, but it doesn't know what a cat is. And that is a problem. That cannot be solved with generative AI. You can never solve the problem of understanding what a cat is. You need an entirely different generation of AI, and that is far into the future. Understanding what things actually are in the world around
consciousness,
them.
right?
Exactly. No understanding that a cat will drown when you hold it underwater for a certain number of seconds. Generative AI will not know this unless, it can regenerate that text if someone typed it somewhere on the planet, and it has that in its corpus, then is able to generate the text that says what I just said, but it still doesn't know what water is or what drowning is. So no, we're stuck with a very, very stupid AI that can do some very, very smart things that we can benefit from in our jobs. And let's just appreciate and embrace that, because it means we can do more in less time. And I think that's a good thing.
Do you use it in your other assignments besides being a writer? How do you use AI as an organizational designer, or for creating workshops, or I don't know?
Well, most of my time is writing, basically, whether blog posts or snippets about the UnFix model, or on the socials, or my books, and so on. So 80% is what I do is writing text. So there's not much else to use it. I'm waiting actually for the release of Microsoft Copilot, so I can experiment with creating slides with AI, because that's also something that I tend to do. So that is around the corner. I look forward to that. And that's basically it. As I said, I would love to use it for organization design, but it's not there yet. I would like to collaborate on that when the opportunity arises, maybe feed it with information about patterns and dependencies between the patterns, and rules and constraints on how the patterns work in what context, and perhaps then we can teach an AI to give us some sensible suggestions for organization design and ways of working. That would be very cool if we could do that. But I'm afraid we're not there yet.
Okay.
So people don't have to worry about their job in that part.
Very good. Very good news. Okay. I have 2 more questions for you, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I would like to know, what questions would you like to be asked more often?
Oh, what questions? I like questions at the personal level. I get many questions about the UnFix model, but I like it when things get personal, about how you live your life and how you implement things in relationships, or in your hobbies, or whatever, or what consequences your work have on your private life, and vice versa, what you've learned from your private life in work. People rarely ask such questions, probably because they want to be professional and stay away from what is private. But at the same time, everyone agrees that we need to be more authentic in our jobs and be your whole self. So I have no problems whatsoever to talk about my spouse or family, kids, or my hobbies, or and so on. What happened today during lunch, etc. Because there are sometimes surprisingly interesting things in these conversations.
That's true. Yeah. Then maybe we need to schedule another interview for that. But then
go ahead.
I would close then with the question: what is the number one learning from your private life to your professional life?
Oh, one thing that I often share is have no expectations.
That's a good one.
And yeah, that's and that is a bit of. And I learned it later, actually. I said that 22 years ago to my current spouse, and we are still happily married, have as few expectations as possible from the other person. That is very hard, because if you have expectations, you have a higher chance of being disappointed because the other person does not live up to the expectations that you have. But it is better to just be surprised by the things that the other person does and to appreciate the things that you did not expect. And that actually makes us happier. And later I learned that is the Stoic way, that is the Buddhist way. Mm-hmm. Of not having expectations, because if you have expectations, basically the expectations own you. Then you are a slave of your own expectations, and you'll only be disappointed because of the things that are not going as you wanted them to go. Yeah. and that makes you unhappy as a person. So that is something that I learned, and it's very difficult. I admit that, because I have expectations all the time, particularly when it comes to me being a customer, for example. Some people have seen that on LinkedIn, that I have some expectations when it comes to being a client of a bank, for example. And then I tell myself, Jurgen, you should not have expectations. Just take things as they are. Yes, they wasted part of your day, but all right, you'll learn some things. Just cherish those, the learnings that you now have, and the funny stories that you can tell during your keynotes. see the good parts that were given to you unexpectedly. Yeah. So that's a tough one.
Thank you so much, Johan, for your time and for the interview.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I wish you a nice day and a lot of luck and a lot of success, especially for your new novel.
Thank you so much. Hope to talk about that another time. Thanks.
See you around. Bye. Das war der Podcast Wir müssen reden. Wenn du eine Frage stellen möchtest oder auch einfach wissen möchtest, welche Fragen wir als nächstes beantworten, wann die nächsten Live-Sessions stattfinden oder wann wir Sonderveranstaltungen anbieten, das alles erfährst du auf unserer Webseite wir-müssen-reden.net.